dust, heat, and condescension. That was Ravenwood Outpost in a single breath. The desert wind howled across the wire, carrying grit that never left your teeth. And inside the chow hall, the laughter was worse than the storm outside. "Clerk," someone muttered, loud enough for the whole table. Heads turned toward the lone figure sitting near the wall, her tray untouched. Warrant Officer Aria Monroe looked older than most of them lines at the edges of her eyes. Hair pulled back in a knot that said she didn't care if it looked sharp. She'd been reassigned from the Quartermaster Corps after decades in technical posts, a paperwork transfer no one had bothered to question, to the young infantrymen around her. She was dead weight. They pointed at the faded patch still clinging to her sleeve, black thread frayed by time. The outline of a raven's wing barely visible. What even is that, some thrift store unit nobody's heard of? The laughter stung more because it was lazy. Dismissal without curiosity. She let them talk. She had let people talk for years. At the far end of the hall, Colonel Rourke's boots struck the tile in measured rhythm. He stopped at her table, a shadow stretching across her tray. His lips curled into the faintest sneer. "You don't belong forward. Warrant, you keep our books balanced. We'll keep the perimeter secure. That's the deal." Arya didn't look up. She didn't need to. His words were meant for the room, not for her. A warning to anyone else tempted to treat her as more than an afterthought. But what he couldn't see, what none of them could see, was the way her eyes tracked the subtle details. The crack in the hall's eastern window frame that let dust leak inside. The half-second delay in the generator's hum. The quiet, clicking pattern in the comms relay overhead. To her, the outpost wasn't just noise and sand. It was a system. And systems always whispered before they broke. Outside, the desert sky darkened. A wall of amber and red stretched across the horizon, swallowing the light. The storm was coming, faster than forecast, heavier than the satellite feeds had warned. Soldiers muttered as the first gust slammed the wire, rattling the watchtowers. Arya set her fork down and finally lifted her eyes. Through the glass, she watched the storm rise like an ocean collapsing in from every side. And, in that moment, with dust already seeping into the cracks, she knew the outpost wasn't ready. Not for the storm, and not for what would be moving behind it. Soldier, where are you tuning in from? Drop your city or base in the comments below. If you believe hidden strength always finds its moment, hit subscribe to Stories Unseen and stand with this story. The storm did not arrive. It crashed. By 1600 hours, Ravenwood Outpost was drowning in sand. The desert horizon vanished in a single breath. The wall of amber swallowing towers, vehicles, and men alike. Wind hammered the perimeter wire until it shrieked like steel under torture. Visibility fell to nothing. Spotlights cut through the haze and showed only more haze, swirling back in on itself. The air was a grinding machine of dust and stone, chewing through lungs and skin. Inside the command post, alarms blared, radios stuttered with static. Satellite uplinks blinked red. The storm had stripped the outpost of its eyes and ears. Colonel Rourke paced tight circles, jaw clenched. "We've got wounded in the aid station if evac birds can't see. We're stranded." The backup generator coughed once, then twice, before choking into silence. Lights flickered. Systems bled to black. No one moved except Arya Monroe. She pushed through the cluster of soldiers in the ops tent, ignored the stairs, and dropped to one knee beside the generator's casing. "Step aside," she said evenly. A young sergeant bristled. "Ma'am, this isn't," but she was already working. Tools clattered from her belt. A coil of copper wire glinting in the emergency light. Fingers steady. She stripped insulation and wound it with tape, bypassing a burnt regulator. She had done this before. Afghanistan. Years back, patching a busted unit under mortar fire with nothing but scavenged parts and her own stubborn will. 90 seconds. The hum returned. Faint at first, then steady. Consoles blinked alive. Screens coughing data back into the room. For the first time since the storm hit. Men exhaled. Colonel Rourke's glare found her. He opened his mouth to bark something, but the comms officer cut him off. "Sir, last UAV feed, before blackout. You need to see this." On the screen, grainy thermal images flickered shapes, faint but deliberate, moving with purpose through the storm. Not random silhouettes, the spacing was too clean, too disciplined. "Enemy patrol," a lieutenant asked. Arya leaned closer. The patterns told a different story. A staggered line, heat blooming at the rear like a carried load. "Not a patrol," she murmured. Her voice cut through the room like a scalpel. "That's a sapper team. They're not probing the wire. They're headed for our generator." The room fell silent. Every man understood what that meant, if the power failed again. Ravenwood would go dark blind, deaf, and vulnerable. And, out in the storm, something was already moving toward that exact point. The command center was drowning in noise static from dead comms. Half-shouted orders, boots scraping metal floors. Colonel Rourke stood at the head of the map table, his voice a whip cutting through the storm inside and out. "We need that relay back online. Without it, Ravenwood is blind. I don't care how make it happen." The engineers exchanged uneasy glances. Finally, Sergeant Gates, leader of the climbing team, spoke. "Sir, the Hardline's junction box is on Skycliff Ridge, 20 feet up the face. In this sandstorm, zero visibility. Wind shear will peel a man off the rock. It's impossible." Rourke's eyes narrowed. "You're telling me my best climbers can't handle 20 feet of sandstone?" His tone dripped contempt. Gates said nothing. Silence was answer enough. From the doorway came a voice calm, steady, unshaken. "I can do it." Heads turned. Aria Monroe stood in the threshold, dust clinging to her jacket, eyes hard as slate. Rourke barked a laugh. "You, a supply officer, think she can stroll up that wall in the middle of hell?" She didn't blink. "The junction box is locked with a T-30 driver. You'll need a splicer modem to bridge the circuit. I'll need 50 feet of 9mm static line and 1 locking carabiner." The comms lieutenant froze mid-breath. "That's correct." "How did you know?" He stopped, realizing she shouldn't have known at all. Rourke's sneer faltered. But he grabbed at authority like a drowning man at rope. "Fine, be my guest. Warrant Officer, gear her up. Put a camera on her. If she dies out there, everyone will see it." Minutes later, the main door groaned against the gale. Wind screamed into the room, filling lungs with dust. Arya pulled on thin gloves worn smooth with age, clipped the modem to her belt, and took the coil of rope and carabiner. No harness, no backup, just a job. On the monitor, a grainy thermal feed flickered to life. A lone figure moved through the storm, the sand shredding her outline into a ghost. Soldiers pressed closer, silent now. She reached the base of Skycliff Ridge and looked up. To the camera, it was a blur of black and gray. To her, it was a map etched in stone. She moved not like a cautious climber, but with the fluid precision of someone who had studied this wall long before tonight. Boots and fingers found invisible holds, diagonal lines of attack no one else could see. 12 seconds in, she reached the junction box, bracing against the gale. Her hand brushed an old steel piton hammered deep into the rock years ago, left from a forgotten training climb. She clipped the static line, securing herself with a single carabiner, then set to work. The storm clawed at her, grit tearing skin raw, but her movements were surgical. T-30 driver out, panel open, splicer modem plugged in. A click, then blinking green. Inside the command center, consoles flared back to life. Screens flooded with fractured codes. Static-laced signals, but they were alive. Ravenwood had a pulse again. Gasps rippled through the room. Even Rourke leaned forward, pale, the disbelief draining the mockery from his face. On the screen, Arya unclipped, dropped the line, and descended with the same impossible speed, sliding, pivoting, boots striking cracks invisible to the eye. She hit the ground light as a shadow, storm wrapping her in dust. In less than 20 seconds, she had done what every man on base had declared suicide. The room erupted shock, awe, the beginnings of something like fear, and then, through the reconnected comms, a voice cut in, harsh, urgent, undeniable, command. This is Shadow UAV relay. Multiple heat signatures approaching from the south, pattern consistent with hostile sapper unit. Advise immediate action. The storm had given Ravenwood back its eyes, and what those eyes saw was death. Closing fast, the command center was alive again. But what flickered across the resurrected screens turned every face grim. Fragmented feeds, stitched together from the Shadow UAV, showed thermal shapes small, fast, and deliberate. 7 figures, cutting through the storm like predators in the dark. Colonel Rourke stabbed at the tactical map, his voice a growl meant to smother the panic. They're headed for the supply route. It's a standard ambush. They'll cut us off. Set kill zones in the canyon. Wait for us to send a patrol. We counter with reconnaissance. Full kit, 2 vehicles, 10 minutes. His officers nodded quickly, eager for the comfort of doctrine. But one voice cut across the room, steady and unshaken. You're wrong. Every head turned. Aria Monroe stood at the edge of the map table, dust still clinging to her jacket, the faded patch Morrigan darkened by the storm. She pointed not to the canyon, but south, where the map bled into jagged ridges and shadowed terrain. They're not a siege force, they're a sapper team. 7 men with demo packs don't cut off convoys, they decapitate bases. Their target isn't your supply line, it's your generator. Without it, you're blind, frozen, and finished. A murmur rippled through the officers. Rourke's face hardened. You're suggesting they'll bypass the canyon, climb 2 clicks of exposed terrain in a storm, just to hit the generator? Arya's eyes never wavered. I'm not suggesting, I'm telling you. The corrupted data showed faint EM bursts, low-frequency signals consistent with M112 demo charges. It's old tech, reliable in high-dust environments. They're already planting. For a heartbeat. Silence crushed the room. Then the comms officer swiveled, pale-faced. Sir, she's right. I've isolated the signal. Low frequency, rhythmic, exactly what you'd see from C4 with a timed detonator. The officer's nods faltered. Rourke's certainty cracked. His plan was unraveling under the weight of her words. He opened his mouth to counter, but a voice thundered through the reconnected net, low and resonant, rolling like artillery across the storm. This is Spooky 3 orbiting at 20,000. Call sign confirms Morrigan. Every sound in the command center died. Even the storm outside seemed to pause. The name hung in the air like a ghost, heavy and absolute. Soldiers who had mocked it days earlier felt their stomachs twist. Colonel Rourke blinked, his mouth dry. Who the hell? The voice continued. Steady now, unmistakable. This is General Elias Ward aboard AC-130U Spooky 3. Confirm I heard Morrigan. Report status. Shock detonated across the room. The General Ward. The Iron Commander whispered about in every deployment was in the sky above them. And he wasn't speaking to Rourke. He was speaking to her. Arya stepped closer to the radio panel, her expression unreadable, her voice calm enough to freeze blood. Ravenwood generator is compromised. Enemy sappers in position. I need an immediate sweep South Ridge. Ward's reply carried a weight that silenced even the storm. Copy that. Morrigan. Thought you vanished. The officers stared at her, the colonel's authority evaporating in the space of a breath. The patch on her jacket was no longer a relic. It was a signal, a name that had once meant nightmares for enemies and salvation for allies. Rourke's voice cracked, the words sounding brittle in the charged silence. What? What are you? Arya turned to him, the storm's red dust swirling in the floodlights beyond the window. Her eyes were slate and steel. I was the ghost you ignored, And now I'm the only reason this outpost will see dawn, before anyone could speak. A new alarm tore through the room. The motion sensors on the generator perimeter had gone live. Hostiles confirmed, closing fast. The storm had delivered them to Ravenwood's doorstep, and Morrigan had just been called back from the dead. The fight at the generator lasted only minutes, but it felt like the outpost held its breath for hours through the restored comms. Muffled bursts of gunfire echoed like thunder under the storm. Then came silence, tense, heavy, absolute command. "This is Alpha Team." Captain Omari's voice finally cut through, raw but steady. "Enemy neutralized. 7 sappers, all carrying M112 demo charges, generator secure, no friendly casualties." The room erupted, relief crashing over the command staff like a wave. Men clapped each other's shoulders. Voices rose in stunned laughter, and the oppressive weight of helplessness finally broke, but in the eye of that storm of emotion. Aria Monroe stood apart, dust-streaked and calm, the faded patch on her jacket whispering its truth louder than the cheers around her. Colonel Rourke stared at her from across the room. He had mocked her, dismissed her, tried to bury her under paperwork and shadows. Now he could see her for what she was: not a clerk, not dead weight, but a weapon so sharp it scared even him. He swallowed hard, straightened, and moved toward her. The room fell quiet as he stopped in front of her. His salute was deliberate, crisp, almost trembling. It wasn't the hollow gesture of a superior acknowledging a subordinate. It was surrender. It was an admission. "Ma'am," he said, his voice tight, "my judgment was wrong. You saved us all." Arya gave the smallest nod, her face unreadable, her eyes ancient with battles no file could ever record. There was no triumph there, no satisfaction in his apology, only the weary acceptance of someone who had carried too much for too long. Above them, the storm began to break. Through the command center's thick windows, a dim glow of dawn pressed against the swirling dust, painting the horizon in bruised shades of purple and gold. The AC-130U broke radio silence one last time. "Morrigan," General Ward said softly, "the field is yours if you want it. Say the word, and I'll have you reinstated before the sun clears the ridge. Command of a ghost unit, or anything else you choose." For a long moment, no one in the room breathed. Then Arya stepped back, her voice steady as stone. "Thank you, General, but my war is over." She turned and walked out, leaving the colonel, the general, and every soldier frozen in her wake. Later, when the medevac finally lifted Sergeant Riley into the breaking light, Corporal Evans returned to the depot to deliver fresh coffee. The supply room was silent. Her desk was empty. Only one thing remained: the faded cloth patch. Laid carefully on the table, Morrigan. He touched it with reverence, realizing what the outpost had just lost. A ghost had walked among them, and now she was gone. The desert wind pushed through Ravenwood's corridors, carrying with it a lesson etched deeper than any regulation: true strength doesn't need to announce itself. It waits in silence, proves itself in action, and disappears before the applause ever comes. And somewhere beyond the ridge, the ghost of Morrigan faded back into legend.